And maybe that was after, Nathan the prophet. But here Solomon, this next generation, has two of Nathan's sons serving in his. So that's a neat story as that goes along. That because you look at that picture where Nathan comes in and says, "You are the man." Boy, that could have gone a whole different direction. But what ends up happening is that kind of endears. There's an endearment there between him and David from that point on, and even carries on to the next generation here. And that's the way it should be. That's the way it should be. When we help each other in the Lord, that should the tie that bonds us together should continue on, and you could see that going more than one generation there.
Okay, so let's remember back when Israel first came into the land was divided into tribes. Remember that? Well, now it's divided into provinces or districts, and they're different lines, basically, from the original tribal lines, as it were. But here, what was the reason for these districts under Solomon's rule here in chapter 4? Yeah, there are princes or overseers of each one of these districts, and they provided something to the king. Yeah, provisions. And so this was a rotation that would take place. Each district would provide provisions for Solomon and his cabinet, as it were, for 1 month.
So is this kind of the first time we've seen a tax system of sorts in Israel?
Yeah, because under Saul, there was no kind of organization like this. And David, spent a lot of his time fighting and, conquering enemies and everything, just trying to secure the land. He didn't seem to organize things to this level. Mm-hmm. But now we're at a point of peace to where things can be organized.
Yeah. The government up to this point has been supported by the people, but not in the type of organized, this right. Group is going to provide this much and so forth.
And, with the undertaking that Solomon has as far as building the temple, and of course, we're going to see all these other projects, he has to have a lot of people under his rule and a part of his cabinet to keep all this organized. And so it's, we might just skip down real quick and I'll let you pick back up. But of course, you have the names of all these individuals that were the leaders, the princes over these districts.
You're going to skip
Yes, I'm just going to skip over that. Now, unless Larson wants to read this section, I'll let him read it. But skip down to verse 22. It says Solomon's provision for 1 day was 30 cores of fine flour. Bob had that broke down to 185 bushels of fine flour. 60 cores of meal, 375 bushels of meal. And then, of course, you have the 10 fatted oxen, 20 pasture-fed cattle, 100 sheep, besides deer, gazelles, roebucks, and fattened fowl. So this is for 1 day. So the people now are, not only are they having to take care of themselves and provide for their own provisions, but they're having to, put back and store up for the king as well. And it's a lot. I mean, this is, we're seeing a shift where, as you say, the taxes, as it were, is going to become a greater and greater and greater burden upon the people as we go.
Wow. So just out of the cattle, so you got the 10 fatted oxen and the 20 oxen from the pasture. So you got your grain-fed and your stall-fed and your pasture-fed cattle. That's 30 a day times 365. You're talking nearly 11,000 oxen needed to supply them for a year. That's a lot of steaks. It's a lot of steaks.
That's really not that much considered how big Israel actually is in landfall. And then if you break that down in provinces, it ain't no telling how much cattle that the Lord actually blessed them with of the new ones coming on, because he said he was going to bless Solomon.
Yeah.
To bless Solomon, you have to bless the people that speak.
This wouldn't be much in Texas, but you got to remember, Israel's only from top to bottom 150 miles long, and from side to side about 30 miles. You're talking northwest Alabama, a little more than northwest Alabama. And so
Much of it's hill country. It's rough.
That's right. So I'm not saying the Lord didn't bless them, because obviously He did, but I'm saying that's a lot. And I think what we're still talking about here is He's got an administration that would rival great empires, and yet He's territorially is not a great empire. And so I think what this does do is it shows the incredible blessing that the Lord has, the position that the Lord has put him in this. Because small country like that shouldn't have this type of need in their royal administration. But because of Solomon's prominence in the position that God's granted him, he does.
Also, you say when you look there towards the end, it says that silver was like pebbles and rocks on the ground.
Yeah.
And all of his utensils he ate of was pure gold.
Yeah, we're going to talk about that, probably not in this lesson, but in the next lesson.
You have to have a big income.
Absolutely.
Whether it's from them or other nations around paying him money to him to even.
Well, from Egypt to the Euphrates, all these territories are paying him tribute.
Yes. Yeah, so look at verse 21. We skipped that, but you notice verse 20 and 21. Judah and Israel were as numerous as the sand of the sea in multitude. What should that immediately, does that ring a bell? What? Abraham. That was the promise. It's like, yes, that was the promise that God made to Abraham. And here we are. How many years are we removed from Abraham now? A good ways. Let's see. We're at 9. So, yeah. And God has still kept that promise, and remember that promise in that. All right. So that's one. And then look at their eating and drinking and rejoicing. What was the land described as? Flowing with milk and honey. And so you see, as numerous as the sand of the sea, living in a land that's flowing with milk and honey. This was the promise that God was talking about. They're living that out right now. So when I talk about Israel at their zenith, in many ways, that's what I mean by this. And so Solomon rules over all the kingdoms from the river. Anybody have a footnote there or anything? When it says the river, what river are we talking about? You would think maybe we're talking about the Jordan, since we're in the land of Palestine, but no. When it says the river in the Bible, it's talking about the Euphrates, which was the prominent river in there. All the way from the Euphrates River to the border of Egypt. So going all the way up into Mesopotamia and then all the way down into Egypt, Solomon is in control of all of that territory all the way through. As a matter of fact, I may have a slide. Yeah. So it would not... the Euphrates would be way, way up here, and Egypt is going to be way down here. So this is Israel. This is not a great map to show this, but a lot of territory under consideration there with that. So things are going really, really well for them, and the land that they have, and they're at peace in all of this. It's not like that they have this territory and they're having to keep their army stationed at the border all the time to fight off invaders. That's not the case. The case is that they're at rest and they're prospering and they're able to enjoy all of this. And
they don't look like anything like Israel today, huh?
No, that's exactly right. That's exactly right. They're not under threat. And so those promises that we see made, back in Deuteronomy and in Genesis, in Exodus rather, those promises are literally being fulfilled at this time, and in a very unmistakable way.
Also, with that treaty with Egypt, with his daughter, he ain't got to fear anything from
Nope.
So he's got all of that protected from anybody coming up.
That's right. And I love verse. I love verse 25. Well, let's verse 24. He had dominion over all of the region on this side of the river, from Tifsar to Gaza, namely over all the kings of this side of the river, and he had peace on every side all around. Verse 25, and Judah and Israel dwelt safely, each man under his vine and fig tree, from Dan as far as Beersheba, all the days of Solomon. So a couple of phrases there. Dan from Beersheba, we're used to that. From north to south, the whole country had this type of peace. And that phrase, each man under his vine and each man under his fig tree, that's a phrase that kind of, I don't know, if I was comparing it to something, I would say, the American dream. Everybody in the United States, they're in, I don't know what decades. Larson, what would be a decade in the United States where everybody was able to live the American dream? The 50s, yeah. Yeah, something like that. So you maybe would describe it that way, the American dream was live and well. Everybody, well, that's kind of that same saying. Every man under his vine and his fig tree means that everybody had peace. They were able to tend to their home place. They were able to prosper in that and enjoy the fruits of their prosperity. That's what's taking place during Solomon's time. That's right. That's exactly right.
Does Psalm 72 fit in here? Does Psalm 72 fit in here?
I don't know Psalm 72.
That would have been one of Solomon's.
Oh, yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, thank you. I couldn't recall it when you said that. You assume that I know those things, but I don't. Yeah, that figures.
Didn't rehash that one, huh?
Yeah. I have it over in verse 32 there, and 127, Psalm 127, those two Psalms, yeah. Any thoughts and comments through verse 25?
Also, note that in verse 24, where it says, and he had peace on all sides around about him. Well, that's God's promise to David.
That's right. That's exactly right.
His son would have peace.
Yeah. Very good.
I think that is helpful because when I was growing up, I'd hear people talk about David not allowing David to build the temple because he had been a killer, right? His hands were covered in blood. But I think that idea of he was waiting for days of peace is that there was going to be a settlement period. So it wasn't that David was guilty, right, because of his warfare. Much of that was on God's behalf. I guess all of it in some way. But Solomon was at a day where the land had peace. And I think Deuteronomy 12 points toward that. I think it talks about a day where there would be rest. And so that statement about David not being allowed to do it in 2 Samuel 7 because he was a man of war is not a condemnation of David, but merely it's not on the timeline yet. But Solomon, whose name means peace anyway, was the representative of that era of peace that God had given. And so that's how everything comes together. So I think that's a helpful note as we make preparation for the following chapter.
Very good. We do see something here in verse 26 through 28 that no commentary is given on this at this point, but this should be a warning sign to those of us who know the promises that God made and some of the warnings that God had given concerning Israel and their kings. Because it said Solomon had 40,000 stalls of horses for his chariots and 12,000 horsemen. And these governors, each man in his month, provided food for King Solomon and all of those who came to King Solomon's table. And there was no lack of their supply. And they brought barley and straw to the proper place for the horses and the steeds, each man according to his charge. And so Solomon is multiplying his horses. What did God say about that? Yeah. What was the other thing God said not to multiply? Okay, that's right. Very good. Maybe somebody may have said I didn't hear it. I heard chariots. What else? Wives. Yeah, we haven't got to that yet, but he's going to multiply those too. And the problem with that is that he's starting to lose focus of God, and he's starting to build up. He's starting to put his trust in something else. Yeah. And he's able to field this type of army, and so why not do it? Well, because what you end up doing is you end up trusting something other than God. And here's the danger of prosperity. Why is it that it's hard for a rich man to enter the kingdom of heaven? It's so easy for a rich man to start to trust his riches. That's the problem. And so nothing's said about it here other than he's just doing this. As a matter of fact, it's put in his list of accomplishments because this would be a great worldly accomplishment. But it's not the best faith move. It's not the best faith move. And we'll talk more about that later.
And then the wives that he had actually brought in more idolatry because they convinced him to build this temple for this God, temple for that. Next thing you know, he is worshiping the idols instead of worshiping God, instead of right reverse.
That's right. Anybody got anything through 28?
All right, and God gave Solomon wisdom and understanding beyond measure and breadth of mind, like the sand on the seashore. Again, that phrase is used, but it's not in numbering people, but it's actually just describing Solomon's mind here. That's what's impressive to me. I mean, to try to grasp a number of people and describe them as sand of the sea, that's one thing, but to describe someone's mind being that broad, I think Bob said describes Solomon as a mental giant at this point in time. And in fact, there are we'll go on. It says in verse 30, so that Solomon's wisdom surpassed the wisdom of all the people of the East and all the wisdom of Egypt. And it gives a description there of some elites, I guess, international elites as far as wisdom goes, some individuals, and Solomon surpassed even their wisdom. Verse 32, he also spoke 3,000 proverbs, and his songs were 1,005. He spoke of trees and from the cedar that is in Lebanon to the hyssop that grows out of the wall. He spoke also of beasts and of birds and of reptiles and of fish. And of course, he I think he writes almost all of Proverbs, Ecclesiastes. You mentioned Psalm 72 and 127. Just incredible. And it says in verse 34, and the people of all nations came to hear the wisdom of Solomon, and from all the kings of the earth who had heard of his wisdom. And we'll have a story later, the Queen of Sheba, and how that unfolds and how impressed she is. She says, the things that she heard wasn't even close to being the truth until she witnessed it for herself. So he was a marvelous man.
Yeah. So I've always loved the book of Ecclesiastes and loved the book of Proverbs. And I don't know that I've thought much about that there must have been times where Solomon had audience where he just sat down and he talked about these things with them. And he just gave his wisdom. I know maybe sometimes it was when a court case was brought to him and he issued some judgment on it and everybody marveled at his judgment. But there also seems to be that people from all nations came, and from time to time he would just sit down with them and talk with them about these type of things. Oh, I would love to have been in that. I would have loved to have had that opportunity. That would have been incredible. And the people who came, as you said, were very impressed with him and that marveled at that. That being said, I would have loved to sit on the Galilean shore and heard Jesus sit in a boat and say, a sower went out to sow. And some see, wouldn't that be amazing? But you know what? We kind of get to do that, don't we? When we read the book of Proverbs, we kind of get to be in that room and listen to the wisdom of Solomon. When we read the Gospel of Matthew, we kind of get to be there on that Galilean shore and listen to Jesus speak. And so what the Holy Spirit has done for us is He's recorded these things so that we have access to the most important of those, the highlights of those. We don't get all of it, but we get the highlights of that. And it's lovely. It's wonderful. And that's one of the things that's so valuable about this book is not just that, we have writings of other ancient wise men, Aristotle, Sophocles. We have some writings that we can look at. But those writings pale in comparison to inspired writings of inspired men. And that's what we have in the Scripture. And that's why it is the book of books in that regard. It is divine history for us, where we have the very, very best. And so just thinking about people gathering around Solomon to hear, when you open up your Bible and you read Proverbs or Ecclesiastes or Song of Solomon, you're there. You're there.
Well, one thing about that, you mentioned Socrates, so when you actually read your books, and I've got your books at the house, they're not inspired by God. I mean, it's just something that they learned during their times that they talked about. But when you read out of the Bible, this all came from God, and it's His plan and all the stuff that the Holy Spirit knew that we needed now for these other men, they're just fools.
That's right. We ready for chapter 5, or anybody have anything else in chapter 4? All right, chapter 5. Now, Hiram, king of Tyre. Now let's go to this map here. The reason I had this map on there was to show where Tyre is. It's up here. So here's Israel's territory. Here's Phoenicia. And Hiram is king of Phoenicia and king of Tyre, which was the capital of Phoenicia. Hiram, king of Tyre, sent his servants to Solomon because he heard that he had anointed him king in place of his father. For Hiram had always loved David, so they had a good relationship there. And so now he wants to congratulate Solomon. And so Solomon replies back to Hiram and said, "You know how my father David could not build a house for the name of the Lord his God, because of the wars which were fought against him on every side, until the Lord put his foes under the sole of his feet." That's interesting when he says, "You know how my father wanted to build a house." I don't know what the friendship was like between David and Hiram, but it appears that there had already been discussion about this, probably because a lot of or at least some of the building supplies David knew would need to come from that area. That's modern day Lebanon. And in the Bible, when you think of Lebanon, what do you think of? The cedars of Lebanon. That's exactly right. The cedars of Lebanon. That was the major forested area in this region. And so David had probably already talked with Hiram about some of this beforehand. So, you know how my father wanted to build a house, but he couldn't because of the wars on every side. But now the Lord my God has given me rest on every side, so that there is neither adversary nor evil occurrence. And behold, I purpose to build a house for the name of the Lord my God, as the Lord spoke to my father David, saying, your son, whom I will set on your throne in your place, he shall build the house for my name. Now therefore, command that they cut down cedars for me from Lebanon, and my servants will be with your servants, and I will pay you wages for your servants according to whatever you say. For you know that there is none among us who has the skill to cut timber like the Sidonians. If you look at a lot of the territory of Israel, you would understand why there weren't a lot of good lumberjacks there. Because you've got little acacia trees and terebinth trees that are, 6 foot high. And those were the trees. It looks a lot kind of like West Texas in a lot of areas where you have a little scrub brush and stuff, but you don't have towering big saw logs. But Lebanon does. And so it makes sense that the Sidonians would be great lumberjacks. And so he says, we need to hire some of your folks to do this. And my servants will work with your servants, but I need your help on this, and I'll pay you whatever. And notice Hiram's response. He heard the words of Solomon, and he rejoiced greatly and said, blessed be the Lord this day, for he has given David a wise son over his people. And Hiram recognizes that, and he rejoices. I wonder what it was. Was it, I know you're wise because you realize that we're the ones that have the skill to cut down timber? Maybe. But it may have been, you're wise because, what did he say? I purpose to build a house for the name of my God. I think maybe that's what it was that Hiram said. That was what David wanted. That's what he charged you with. And you purpose to do that. That's a wise son. That's a wise son. Any thoughts through verse 7? All right.
Verse 8. And Hiram sent to Solomon, saying, I have heard the message that you have sent to me. I am ready to do all that you desire in the matter of cedar and cypress timber. So Hiram is excited in his response. Verse 9, my servants shall bring it down to the sea from Lebanon, and I will make it into rafts to go by sea to the place you direct. And I will have them broken up there, and you shall receive it. You shall meet my wishes by providing food for my household. So Hiram supplied Solomon with all the timber of cedar and cypress that he desired, while Solomon gave Hiram 20,000 cores of wheat as food for his household and 20,000 cores of beaten oil. Solomon gave this to Hiram year by year. And the Lord gave Solomon wisdom as he had promised him, and there was peace between Hiram and Solomon, and the two of them made a treaty. So this process, of course, you can't really tell from that but the trees are going to be cut, but to bring it straight south would be difficult, really difficult upon that crescent. The easier thing would be bring it down from the crescent east to the shoreline, which would just be a few miles from what I understand. And as he said, build it into rafts, and then they're going to float it down to Joppa, I believe, is where Israel would receive it, tear the rafts apart, and then bring it back up to Jerusalem.
This is what is typically referred to in the Bible as the hill country of Judea. All of this area, just all around Jerusalem, all the way up. And you have the mountains of Ephraim up here, all the way up. So that is a mountain ridge that runs all the way there. Mountains are not where you want to be toting lumber. And so downhill from where they were cut to the sea, float them down. They would have to go back uphill from Joppa to Jerusalem, but that is a more gradual slope.
Could they not also brought that across to where the Sea of Galilee, the water up there? Was it enough water that they could drop it right there and bring it all the way down, and you got a little short route to it?
Yeah, they wouldn't be able to float it. Now, there is the Jordan Plain, which would be more level ground to haul it, for sure. But the Jordan River, in most places all along here, except during the flood stage when all of the ice is melting up here near Mount Hermon, is usually no wider than in this.
Yeah, and it mentions, this was done year by year. So this was over a span of time delivering these. You snake it down to Jordan, and it would slow the process down dramatically.
Mm-hmm.
I would assume. I mean, I imagine these rafts are sizable rafts that they're assembling and bringing down at a time. Yeah, probably a barge.
Yeah. I wonder how many of them were lost in the Mediterranean, because there's some pretty rough story. But I suppose they know better than I about that. So Solomon gives Hiram what he asked for, 125,000 bushels of wheat and 115,000 gallons of pressed oil year by year. So I don't know exactly, but I suppose that was a fair deal. I don't know. But that's a lot. That seems like a lot.
There seems to be some other things tied to this that may not have been so fair.
That's right. Yeah, there were some cities given that we'll see later that Hiram was like,
yeah,
these are kind of worthless. So, but notice verse 13. King Solomon raised up a labor force out of Israel, and the labor force was 30,000 men, and he sent them to Lebanon, 10,000 a month in shifts. They were 1 month in Lebanon and 2 months at home. And so this is kind of like, okay, we've got this big project. It's a project for the Lord. So we're going to need 30,000 men, and we're going to need 10,000 a month to go up there. I don't know if this was voluntary. I don't know if this was draft or whatever. But how would you feel about it? Let's say you've got to go, or someone in your family has to go to do this. How do you feel about this?
Well, from what's described when he told them that they was going to build a temple, that they need to yield. They yield.
So you'd feel pretty good about it. You'd feel like, yeah, I can do that. I can take 1 month out of every 3 and go and do this, because it's not going to be forever, right? It's just till we get these supplies down here, and it's for the Lord's cause. We're going to do that. I think that's probably the attitude that they have with this.
I also would believe that the ones that are going, that Solomon would actually provide for the men's family while they're gone, because it's work for the Lord. They're going up there. He'll go ahead and take care of the family. And the people would volunteer, King's going to take care of my family. I'm going to go up there and do this work for the Lord because he's so prosperous. I mean, if he's paying the king up there, all that right there, it would seem that he would actually help the families that are going up there to do the work.
So verse 15. Solomon had 70,000 who carried burdens, and 80,000 who quarried stones in the mountains, beside 3,300 of the chief Solomon's deputies who supervised the people who labored in this work. This is a big workforce here for a small country. and he's incorporating or involving these people in there. Again, I suspect at this point that the attitude is, hey, this is a worthy cause. We're involved in this, and we're thankful to be involved in this. I want you to keep that in mind, because for a short period of time, for a worthy cause, I think people can be all in. What Solomon's going to end up doing is, over the next 40 years, he's going to keep drawing these people for more and more projects, more and more projects. Steve talked about him taking care of the family. I will say this, it talks about Israelites, the individual Israelites, prospering greatly during this time. So it may be that they are making good money in these projects. They start off these projects as, we're the Lord's people and this is the Lord's cause. But as time goes on, it becomes more of, Solomon's just building a lot of things. And we may be getting rich off of this, but we're tired of it. We're tired of it. So just kind of watch as that changes. Yes, sir.
Fulfillment of Samuel's prophecy.
Exactly.
Yep.
We want a king. Okay. But let me tell you, what a king's going to do is the very thing that Solomon has started. There's going to be a cost to it. That's right.
The ESV does say that Adoniram was in charge of the draft
Okay.
in verse 14.
All right.
So,
Yeah. Labor force is what the New King James says, but draft.
okay.
There. Yeah. That's good. All right. So he's quarrying large stones, hewn stones to lay the foundation. Anything else through chapter 5?
The stones, it says that they poured. The part of the temple, the Wailing Wall, it's got the original stones down below that you can still see. Those limestones are bigger than what our machinery today can cut.
Yeah.
And they cut them by hand or whatever they used and brought them from whatever quarry down there. And they didn't have the machines we got today.
Yeah, that's right. I think one of them there's 40 tons. I will say this, it doesn't take away anything from your point. The ones that are on the Wailing Wall were actually from Herod's temple, not from Solomon's temple, but it doesn't take away from your point that they didn't have the machines that we have today either. And Herod's.
Cut them that big and go.
Yeah, right. Yep. Any other thoughts? Let's we got a minute, we don't want to waste it. Look at chapter 6 and verse 1. It came to pass in the 480th year after the children of Israel had come out of the land of Egypt, in the 4th year of Solomon. So we're looking at, most date this somewhere around 960, 966 BC is the date that I've heard probably most. 966 BC, 4th year of Solomon's reign. So that tells you he started with this in mind, but it's taken kind of 4 years to get to this point, to get everything in place, even though David had gotten a lot in place beforehand for this, that he's going to begin in the 2nd month of that year, he begins to build the house of the Lord. And so the process has started. So what we will do next class is we will go through and we will look at the temple from the description that we have. We don't have as detailed a description of the temple as we did the tabernacle. And so some of this we can tell the rough dimensions, we can get some scale of its grandeur, but as far as the details, we're not going to have as many details. Any final comments?
When you was over there, don't they have a place somewhere there in Israel where they done a smaller mock-up of what Solomon's temple was before it was destroyed, the archaeologists?
There may be one of Solomon's. The one that I visited that's in the Israeli Museum there in Jerusalem is of Herod's temple. They've got, it's probably about the size of this room, and they have a little miniature to scale replica of Jerusalem at that time and the temple there. It's bigger than this room. It's probably as big as this building, maybe even as big as the parking lot. But
I think I heard you mention it when you come back from over there.
Yeah.
They actually had something.
yeah, it's pretty neat. Thank you. Thanks for watching. If you found this video to be beneficial, please follow us on Facebook or subscribe to our YouTube channel. Feel free to share it with others that you feel like may benefit from it. If you need to contact us, please contact us via email at quinn.church@yahoo.com. Also, if you're in the area, we would love for you to come visit with us at one of our assemblies. Have a good day.